going through real quickly, I've got this spirituality and healthcare kick that I'm just get used to it because I'm going to be on it for a while. There's a lot of information. It's a topic that just kind of chaps my hide, so to speak. And
you found your own failure of Christianity series.
It's just something that I have trouble understanding, and so I decided. I started reading articles, and I reported a little bit on these articles, and I finally got to the point where I'm like, I want to start reading some books. I want to start reading, and I think I talked last time I was on about a book that I read by somebody who has written what may be the lone skeptic voice in the book world on this topic, and then all the other books seem to be, positive and pro and like promotional of integrating spirituality and religion into healthcare. And so I went for a book called Faith and Mental Health that is, according to the author in the intro, it says the book is for mental health providers, public health service planners, researchers, university or medical school faculty involved in training of mental health practitioners and other health professionals who desire to understand better the role of religion as a resource or liability, in parenthetical, for those with emotional or mental problems. So this is a book for reference and practice. And the author, I talk a little bit about at the blog, very well-credentialed individual. And I would direct you at the blog for a more robust reading of this. I just am going to hit the highlights right here. I'm not going to sit here and read this blog. It's over 2,000 words. But anyway, I was very encouraged to see that parenthetical liabilities, and I thought, oh, good, because there are some liabilities and those deserve some discussion. And so I am kind of mainly interested in that because one of the criticisms that I had of the research papers is that it seems like the liabilities involved or the problems that could arise from integrating religion and spirituality into healthcare were very minimized in most of the research. So there's a lot of promotional material, and there's always this sort of, it's almost like a little asterisk that is, and be careful because you don't want to impose your religious views on the patient. So be careful. But there's not anything robust about, here's the problems and here's how you might do something inappropriate and here's what you shouldn't do. I mean, there's this sort of acknowledgement that this could be inappropriate in some settings, but there's nothing really to make it clear what that would be or what to avoid, or it just seems like that's not getting any, nearly, at least I would say, nearly the airplay it should be getting. So in this vein, I was really hoping that with the liabilities being described that would be hit, but I've just, I started reading this book, and I'm going to say that, I'm still reading the book, so I have not finished this book. And what I did with the last book sort of taught me a little bit of a lesson. I didn't want to start writing about the book that I read the last time until I got through it. And I thought, well, let me get through it, and then I will blog about, the whole experience. And what happened was there were Post-it notes on every other page of the book. I mean, I got through the end of this thing, and it was just posting, and some of the pages might have had, Post-it notes throughout this book. And I just thought, now I'm overwhelmed and I'm paralyzed with inability to write about it because there's so much material that the only way to write about it would be to actually go back to page 1 and then start going through and looking at what I was marking and why I thought it was important, and then hitting that. So with this particular book, I do want to say up front, I have not read through it. And in fact, I couldn't get through the introduction before I was like, I have to start because, okay, here's where the Post-it notes are starting. And before I get, 500 Post-it notes in this book, we're going to talk about the initial Post-it notes that I'm having already at the introduction. So just kind of to clarify where I am in this book and that this is not a comprehensive review by any stretch. So in the introduction, like I said, I talked about who this is written for. So this is a professionally intended offering. And there's some stories that are offered to sort of prop up the idea that, and maybe I shouldn't say prop up. There's stories that are offered in the defense of that religion can be useful and helpful in this mental health field. And certainly we have talked in the past about how it's a completely appropriate thing for a mental health care worker to refer a patient for religious, support if the patient would benefit from that, and if they are asking for it, if this is something that fits with the patient, and they're saying, they want that support. Yes, there are lots of mental health professionals who do partner with people in the community who are religious leaders, who are willing to help a person who is part of their religious community who wants that support and wants that help outside of counseling. It's nothing that a counselor should be proactively pushing on a patient. It's just something that some patients, are religious already when they go into counseling, and they would benefit by some support in that vein. So the stories that are offered, there were a few stories that when I read them, I kind of thought, oh, okay, so now we're going to talk about the liabilities. And when I would get to the end of the story, it was like, no, we're calling this a religious help. And I'm thinking, how is this religious help? Because this is a religious liability. Like, am I reading the same story? Like, the story that you just wrote isn't really supporting what you're describing. So the first story was a story about a community in Belgium in the 13th century, and he starts historically and he comes to the present, kind of saying, here's some times that religion was integrated into either physical or mental health care, where it was useful, and religion can be used as a positive tool in healthcare. So in this particular little town, there's a legend that builds up around a young woman, and she is martyred. The legend is that she's martyred, and that she is and then the church actually did saint her, so she becomes a saint. And then this story starts to build, which is common, especially in like the old world Catholicism, where there's this spot where she was said, something happened with her, and so now that spot is magical and it has healing powers, kind of like they have, those springs and things that are supposed to heal you, that are like these religious stories. And so there's these healing powers in this little town or near the town. And so people start coming there for help, right, to be healed, sort of like, I guess we go to faith healers and things.
Lords.
Yeah, there you go, that sort of thing, exactly. Right. So one of the things that they do is they bring their loved ones there who need help, that are mentally ill, because it's said to like help people that are mentally ill. And they were chaining them up to trees in the town or around the town because the hospital was overflowing with people who had dumped their relatives off to be cured by the magic place.
I don't think that's helpful.
No, and it's really not helpful to chain someone up and leave them to a tree.
Whether they had mental problems or not, I don't think you should do that.
It's the 13th century, and maybe that sort of thing was more common, but I don't know. But you wouldn't normally like take your child, leave them in some village chained to a tree, and then go home saying, thank the Lord, they're going to be helped. But this is what people were doing. And so the people in the town, of course, are left with this situation now where other people are coming from other towns and leaving mentally ill people chained to trees. And I guess it's not funny, right? It's not a funny situation, but there's something kind of surreal about it. Like when you're reading it, you almost can't believe what you're reading. And so when I'm laughing, it's not because I find this funny. It's really appalling, and I'm glad that this was the 13th century and not today, because if this was today, then it would really not be, anything. I mean, it's hard to believe. So the people in the town, with nowhere to put these mentally ill people, they took them into homes, and they sort of took care of them there, which he describes in the story that this is like the beginning of family foster care for mentally ill people. And, I don't know, maybe it is. I have no idea. But the point is, they were having mentally ill people literally dumped in their town. And they had an option there to either leave them chained to a tree and allow them to die, or to take them into their homes. So ultimately, they took them into their homes. They couldn't take them into the hospital because the hospital was already past capacity. Well, in the end, nothing is said in the introduction about religion's role in encouraging people and promoting this idea that encouraged people and gave people the idea that this was acceptable or this would be a positive thing to chain people up to a tree and leave them abandoned, potentially to die, in a strange town. But the story takeaway that we're supposed to get, according to the introduction, is, isn't it great that the religious people of the town helped the mentally ill people that were chained to trees?
Now wait, this is a book about religion specifically being applied to healthcare.
It's called Faith and Mental Health.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily going to talk just about religion being applied professionally. They're just saying, oh, la-di-da, religion is great because it makes people help other people.
In the
is
end,
that his point of this story?
What he's trying to, let me see if, let me find the little synopsis here where he talks about, I put, according to, his name is Koenig, these are among the stories of help the faith community can offer. So that's what we're saying. And let's see, I'm going a little bit out of turn here. But there's something about like how he described this here. Maybe I shouldn't have scrolled. Yeah, I'm kind of losing my train here. But yeah, in the end, I do give at the blog the description of what exactly he says these stories are supposed to show. Like I give the quote from the intro where he's described, and I'm just like, wait, that's not what I took away. But now that you're describing
it after having read it, it's not immediately obvious even to you where the connection to actual healthcare comes in.
Well, I think what he's saying...
It's like these people on their own acting individually were humane enough not to let these people just be chained to the tree and starve or whatever.
Right, and what he attributes that to is religion. And I attribute that to just... Yeah, seriously.
I mean, if there was any religion in that story, it was the notion that people would come there in the first place and think that they were going to get healed without enough medical staff available. And so the role of religion in this story seems to be giving people this misleading idea that actually harmed their health care.
Yeah, and what was really interesting, like I said, I invite people to go to the blog and see the full article, but there's like a quote that I have in there somewhere where where he says, he's quoting someone else, but it's in the vein of when somebody quotes the Bible, but they're really promoting their own view. So basically it's like, what do you think about this? They quote the Bible, and then you say, why would you believe that? And they're like, oh, that's what God says, not what I say. Right. You know what I mean? So I'm going to say...
It's like they say on the Reasonable Doubts podcast.
I want to make it clear that the particular quote I'm looking for... oh, here it is. He says, in his summary, he says, these cases illustrate how individual persons and communities of faith can help those with emotional and mental problems bear their burdens, which is the major focus of this book. So I'm looking at that story and I'm saying that is not about a faith community that helped people. That is about people that helped people who happened to also be part of a faith community. But one of the things he brings up is a quote that was offered by someone, I think, at the time, and it had to do with the idea of them being motivated by the promise of heaven. And I was like, isn't it interesting that he uses the quote that talks about the promise of heaven, but doesn't feel any obligation to also bring up the fact that they are also operating under a threat of hell.
Right.
Right? I mean, if we're going to talk about incentivizing people and we're going to say, oh, the promise of heaven, because that is included in Christianity and that is probably why they do good things, why wouldn't you say they do good things because we threaten them? We threaten them with hell, and that makes them good people. So that's why we threaten people with hell. No, you go for the promise of heaven. It's the upbeat spin. Yeah. It's like, yes, in the 13th century, they were threatened with hell, right? I mean, that was something that a lot of people accepted and believed in. But the next story, I won't go through in as much detail, but just to summarize it, it's about a woman in the modern day that was actually part of his caseload. And she is a very religious woman and also very mentally sick. But she is outside. She's not in inpatient, so she is operating and functioning outside. But she is, got some serious mental health problems, and she's also part of a religious community. This particular person contacted him and said that she wanted support, community support, of her peers, maybe a couple times a week to just meet with somebody and just have that sort of connection and friendship and support. And so he asked her, which I think is a reasonable question, have you approached your church? Because if you're engaged in that and that's your community, then
that's your built-in social
right,
network.
Right,
so.
And she basically said that she had met with the pastor, but that he didn't seem to have enough time for her. And so out of like 1,000 people in her church, and he did give that figure as like it was 1,000 strong or whatever, she couldn't find one person that would be her friend, basically. I mean, just think about it. If you have a friend and you contact them twice a week, that's not extreme. So she was unable to find a friend out of 1,000, Christian counterparts there at that church. So he thought, and he described it, and he said he thought it would be a snap, and so he starts calling around and making some calls and reaching out to the religious communities in the area, and he's getting passed off to other people, being told they don't have time. He can't find anybody to help her, and then he starts reaching out to there's the congregations that are involved, not just the leadership, and he ultimately ends up having to go out of state to try and find a solution to this, and he's thinking to himself, I'm a pretty well-known, pretty prominent psychiatrist, and I can't find help for this woman. How is she supposed to find help? How is she supposed to find support when I can't even get somebody to commit to helping her? So ultimately, at the end of like months, what he described as months and months of like dismal lack of response and nobody stepping up out of how many thousands of people and how many different congregations and how many different faith communities, one woman steps forward and says she'd be willing to do this. Now, I'm waiting for the punchline here of, and then we started up a mental health support group and it was great. No, this one woman stepping out of all the thousands of people that gave no support whatsoever is supposed to be the example of how the faith community can help.
Wait, and what did she wind up doing for her?
She was her friend. She
was
met her twice
friend.
a week, right? I mean,
she talked to her.
Yeah.
She did some free
Yeah.
counseling,
Yeah.
which I would
if
expect
that's what it
of many
takes
of my
to get
friends.
help from the faith community, I'm not sure how helpful they are. I mean, I would have to say, and believe me, I mean, he talks about some of the problems that we have just overall socially with getting people to accept the mentally ill. And I am not going to sit here and hammer people of faith for not helping when most people would probably be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If but at the same time, if your goal is to say the faith communities are so useful and so helpful, and then you give this story where you had to break your neck to try and find one person to help, after saying that they are encouraged to help and will help because of the promise of heaven, what happened to your promise of heaven?
Yeah.
All these people in this Belgian community were helping everyone, and you expect it because Christianity promises heaven, and so they're all going to be good and they're all going to help people. But here's these people in modern times, and they have that same promise of heaven, and you can't get them to step up. I don't think it's the promise of heaven. I think it's the individual person.
I'm always willing to grant that, there are a lot of things that we find wrong with religion, obviously. That's part of what we talk about here regularly. But one thing that I think religion is not bad at, or at least not supposed to be bad at, is providing that social support network of providing help for people. And yet, if anything, using this story as I guess one of the best examples he could find of the church doing good things for mental health, I would expect to hear something extraordinary from these people. And instead, I can't imagine that I wouldn't get the same thing from like the local atheist community of Austin or the global atheist community with American atheists and people who step up to support people who are having trouble there. I've heard that happen plenty. I've heard like great big Kickstarter campaigns that have helped people in need. Granted, it doesn't happen all the time, but being willing to talk to somebody who's in trouble is not above and beyond the call of duty.
Yeah,
it's very nice that it worked out well.
And being willing to help someone who's been chained to a tree to die to me
Yeah.
is pretty basic. I mean,
it's a no-brainer.
yeah, it might put you out, but I mean, what are you supposed to do? Leave a person to die chained to a tree? You know, someone who needs help. So, yeah, it's a little bit disturbing the way it's interpreted, and I just look at it. What I suggest at the blog post is that maybe it wasn't a promise of heaven or a bribe of heaven that made these people be decent human beings. Maybe they actually just are decent human beings, right? Maybe they were just decent people. Maybe it's not that they had to be bribed to act like a human being. But anyway, it gets better. Or worse, however you think about it. I don't know. But I tell a little bit of a story about a woman who shared with me that she was horribly and chronically sexually abused when she was younger. And she had a religious relative that said to her something like, oh, well, but, you know, look what a great person you are today, and you wouldn't be that great person without your past experiences, and so it was probably, you know, basically God's way of making you a good person by having you molested so horribly as a child so frequently. And she said, I didn't know what to say. When my relative said this to me, I didn't know what to say, because I am proud of who I am today, and I do feel like, you know, what I've gone through is, you know, shaped me into, and I'm like, yeah, what we go through in our past definitely shapes us in ways, you know what I mean? We react to that, we respond to that, we you know, incorporate things, we reject things. But the point is, there are some things that we become good, happy, wonderful people in spite of having gone through. And there are other things that it's, you know, partly because we've gone through. And I think for her, it was you were able to become the person you are today in spite of what someone did to you, not because of. And the fact is, you don't know, had you not been molested, maybe you would have even been like leagues ahead of where you are right now. There's no way to know, right? And what about the person who doesn't get to be a wonderful person at the end of it, and what they end up doing is killing themselves because they end up with depression after being so abused? Or what about the person who's murdered by their abuser? You know, are those people, what exactly did they gain by this? What was the reward or the wonderful benefit to that, right? So I have a bad reaction to the idea that someone would try to tell a person who was abused or molested or otherwise, you know, maltreated in a horrible way, that this is all for the good, right? You suffered for the good here. But this is a quote from the book. By emotional problems, I mean short or long-term struggles with depression, anxiety, or other difficulties with mood or happiness. By mental illness, I mean schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other long-term psychoses or severer personality disorders. Emotional problems and mental illness trap people in prisons of fear, despair, confusion, and loneliness. Those afflicted with these conditions did not choose them. More likely, it is their genes, childhood experiences, or severe adult trauma that have thrust them into these precarious, painful paths. And this is where it sounds normal up to now, but then it takes a little bit of a dark twist. Many see it as a cruel stroke of fate. Or is it? What if having such a life meant something else, something not completely senseless, but rather was evidence for, and I say this a bit cautiously, and I'm just like, wow, if this is you being cautious, I don't know what you would be like throwing caution to the wind. He calls it a type of unique calling. Is it possible that those with mental illness provide others with the opportunity to care, to love, to reach out to them, an opportunity that would otherwise not exist? So this is me. You're suffering, so I can have an opportunity to help you, okay? That's why, so it's just some people just, you know, get the crap end of the stick so that others can feel good about not having the crap end of the stick and being able to help, right? That's why you're born with a defect, or you're, you know, born with a mental illness, or that you suffered some horrible trauma, so that I could be a good person and come out looking like Superman. That's what it's all about here. Anyway, he goes on to say, could those struggling with mental illness serve as beacon lights illuminating the narrow way to real life that few ever find? Could they be pointing the way for people of faith and others to follow, so that the care, love, and service provided to the mentally ill by them would demonstrate to the world the best of what it is to be human? Would that be possible without the help of those with mental illness, without their pain? Does this mean that religious congregations need persons with mental illness in their midst in order to be fully functional, caring communities? It's worth thinking about. And I read that last line and I said, yes, that's very much worth thinking about, because I want to know if they think that they need to propagate people's mental illnesses in order to be good people. If I'm going to say that I think that people need to suffer so that I can be good, and you're saying that that's a requirement of your community to be what it needs to be, then you have a really messed up community. I don't know what to say. I mean, why would you even be attempting to alleviate suffering if you believe that suffering is so key to what he said? He basically said the best of what it is to be human may not even be possible without other people suffering mental illness. So basically you're saying if we cure mental illness, we might strip ourselves of the capacity to show the best of what it is to be human. Why would we want to take that away, right? I mean, it sounds like a reason to not help people, to just pretend to help people. And that made me start thinking about it more, and I thought more about something that I always think about, which is that religion often uses this. Religion will often propagate suffering in order to justify its own existence, to justify its helping, right? And it'll undermine real social positive change in order to ensure that there is this problem that they can then be the solution for. And I give a couple of examples of that at the blog. Of course, they're pretty obvious, but won't get into that too much. If you want to read more about it, read more about it. We have callers queued up, but it's all at the blog, and I totally recommend giving that a read, because I think it's just something we need to start looking more closely at. Like I say every time I talk about this, I just don't think people are aware of what's going on. This is a practitioner's book. This is not like some preacher writing this. This isn't a crazy apologetic book. This is a man writing a book who has credentials and is prominent in his community, and he is, espousing this to other practitioners as like his position on these resources. And I think we need to know what's going on in this community.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy.